Here is something nobody corrects at the start of this story. The Nazca lines cannot only be seen from the air. That idea, that an ancient civilization carved hundreds of figures into a desert plateau specifically for an aerial audience, is the founding myth of this entire mystery. It is the premise of 100 documentaries. It is why the alien theory exists, and it is wrong. You can see many of the figures clearly from the surrounding foothills. You can see some of them from low mounds scattered across the plateau itself. The Nazca people did not need helicopters. They did not need visitors from another galaxy. They needed to climb a hill. Everything that follows is going to build on that correction. Because the moment you stop asking who could see the lines from the sky, you can start asking a far more interesting question. One with a real answer. An answer that is, frankly, more astonishing than any alien theory has ever managed to be. In the Peruvian desert, carved into one of the driest places on Earth, an ancient civilization spent 1,000 years drawing prayers. Hundreds of animals. Thousands of lines. An area roughly 80 kilometers long and 15 wide, scraped by hand into pale desert stone. And in 2024, an AI found 303 figures nobody had ever recorded. The case just reopened. Before anything else, you need a baseline. Because most of what popular culture tells you about the Nazca lines is simplified, wrong, or engineered to make you think of aliens before you think of evidence. Here is what we know. The Nazca lines are geoglyphs. They sit on a high desert plateau called the Pampa Colorada in the Ica region of southern Peru. The plateau stretches roughly 80 kilometers long and 15 wide. This is not a small canvas. This is an area bigger than the city of Los Angeles. The technique is straightforward, and that is exactly what makes it extraordinary. The desert surface is covered in a layer of reddish iron oxide stone. The Nazca scraped that top layer away, 10 to 30 centimeters, to reveal the pale, yellowish-gray subsoil underneath. The contrast between the two colors creates the lines. No paint, no machinery, just human hands, wooden stakes, and geometric precision that should embarrass commentators who assume ancient people were simple. Some figures are tiny, 5 meters across, a spider, a flower. Others are enormous. The hummingbird stretches 93 meters. The condor spans 270 meters wingtip to wingtip. The longest straight lines run 48 kilometers without measurable deviation. 48 kilometers, in a straight line, across undulating terrain, without GPS, using only string and stakes. Modern engineers have tested the method. It works. The Nazca did not need alien technology. They needed patience. The figures fall into two categories. Biomorphs, the animals and plants, the spider, monkey, hummingbird, condor, whale, hands, then the geometric shapes, trapezoids, triangles, spirals, and lines. Thousands of lines running in every direction. The whole complex was built between roughly 500 BCE and 500 CE. 1,000 years of continuous construction by successive generations. Now, back to visibility. The idea that the lines cannot be seen from the ground came from the American historian Paul Kosak, who studied them in the 1930s after seeing them from a small plane. He was dazzled and made a reasonable assumption. These were designed for an aerial audience. That assumption stuck. It became the premise for everything that followed, including the alien theory. But the plateau is not flat. There are elevated positions throughout the region. There are foothills on its edges. A 2016 study in the Journal of Archaeological Science confirmed that several key figures are legible from natural and constructed high points within the plateau itself. The Nazca did not need aerial perspective to design, build, or appreciate their own work. They knew what they were making. They could see it, which brings us to the only question that has ever mattered. Why? The Nazca are not a mystery civilization. We know a great deal about them. They flourished in the river valleys and desert edges of southern Peru from roughly 500 BCE to 500 CE. At their peak, they supported urban centers and produced some of the finest textiles in the ancient world. They also built an engineering system that still, in 2024, supplies water to communities in the Ica region. That system is called the puquios, underground aqueducts. Spiral-shaped openings in the desert surface funnel wind down into subterranean channels that carry water from the mountains to the settlements below, carved through bedrock without metal tools. Some researchers consider the puquios the single greatest engineering achievement of the ancient Americas. Almost nobody talks about them, because a water pipe is not as dramatic as a monkey drawn in a desert, but they tell you everything about the Nazca. This was a civilization consumed by water, not because they were superstitious, but because they were rational. The Pampa Colorada receives less than 20 millimeters of rain per year. That is not a drought. That is a permanent state of near aridity, broken occasionally by torrential seasonal rains that disappear almost as quickly as they arrive. In a landscape like that, water is not a resource. Water is a theological event. Every major Nazca settlement sits along a seasonal river. Every Nazca ceramic tradition features imagery of water, rain, mountains, and water cycle creatures. The orca, the spider, the hummingbird. These are not decorative choices. They are theological statements about where water comes from and how to ask for it. Then, there were the trophy heads. The Nazca practiced ritual decapitation. Human skulls, with a hole drilled in the forehead for a carrying cord, have been found across their territory. Early interpretation assumed warfare. Recent DNA analysis of the skulls shows something different. Many individuals were local, from Nazca communities themselves. This was not an army's trophy collection. Current theory holds that the trophy heads were ritual intercessors, offered to the mountain gods in exchange for water. You do not give something cheap to a deity who holds your survival in their hands. And then something went wrong. Around 500 CE, the Nazca collapsed. The timing matches a climatic shift. But it also matches something the Nazca did to themselves. They cut down the huarango trees. The huarango is a native Peruvian desert tree whose roots reach 40 meters down to find water. It stabilizes soil, it maintains the water table, it is the biological infrastructure that makes life in the Ica Desert possible. The Nazca cleared huarango forests to plant maize and cotton. Without the trees, the soil destabilized. The water table dropped, the Andes floods, when they came, turned catastrophic. The Puquios could not compensate for the collapse of the system they had been built to supplement. The Nazca were gone within a few generations. The lines stayed. Here is the thing nobody states plainly enough. The Nazca lines were built by a civilization trying to survive. Every figure, every trapezoid, every line was part of a system for maintaining the relationship between people and the natural world that kept them alive. When that relationship broke, not because of alien abandonment, not because of divine punishment, but because of deforestation, the lines kept sitting in the desert, perfectly preserved, waiting for the next civilization to come along and assume they were meant for someone else. We assumed they were for aliens. The Nazca drew them for the rain. In 1968, a Swiss hotel manager named Erich von Däniken published a book called Chariots of the Gods. It sold over 65 million copies. It spawned documentaries, a television series, and an entire genre of pseudo-archaeology that is still running on cable television right now. His argument regarding the Nazca lines: the lines are too precise to have been built by ancient humans. They are only visible from the air. Therefore, they were built by or with guidance from extraterrestrials, and the largest geoglyphs functioned as landing strips for alien spacecraft. This theory has three specific and fatal problems. Problem 1, precision. Von Däniken assumed the geometric accuracy required technology beyond what the Nazca possessed. In 1983, scholar Joe Nickel demonstrated that a small team using only wooden stakes and string could reproduce any Nazca figure to the same precision in a matter of days. No metal tools. No computers. The precision is remarkable. It is not superhuman. Problem 2, visibility. You already know this one. Problem 3, the landing strip argument. The trapezoid figures have been compared to runways: wide, flat, long, but their edges are bordered by low ridges of piled stone. If you were designing a landing surface for any flying object, you would not surround it with raised stone borders that would destroy the landing gear. The alien theory is not wrong because it is audacious. Audacious theories have overturned consensus science before. It is wrong because it fails on the specific evidence. There is also a cultural dimension worth naming directly. The alien theory requires the assumption that pre-Columbian Andean people could not have built the Nazca lines without outside help. This assumption was never applied to the Romans when they built aqueducts, or to the Egyptians when they built the pyramids with equivalent technology. It is applied specifically and repeatedly to indigenous peoples in the Americas and across the global south. That pattern is not a coincidence, and it is not archaeology. The Nazca lines were built by the Nazca, with sticks and string, and the kind of collective human determination that only happens when the alternative is dying of thirst. Von Däniken did do one useful thing accidentally. He made the Nazca lines famous enough that serious researchers started paying attention. One of them was a German mathematician who arrived in Peru in the 1940s and never went home. She used to chase tourists off the plateau with a broom. Maria Reich was born in Dresden in 1903. She studied mathematics. She arrived in Peru as a young teacher, began working with Paul Kosak in 1946, and then stayed for the next 52 years. Kosak left. Reich stayed. For 5 decades, she lived on the Pampa Colorada. She mapped the geoglyphs by hand, crawling across the desert with rulers, protractors, and graph paper, measuring each figure to millimeter precision. She campaigned to protect the plateau. She lobbied the Peruvian government with her own money to stop a highway being built across the lines. The highway was built anyway. It cuts straight through the geoglyphs. Reich watched it happen and did not leave. Her theory was that the Nazca lines formed an astronomical calendar. She believed the figures and lines aligned with the positions of the sun, moon, and major stars at the time of their construction, allowing the Nazca to track seasons and predict the timing of the mountain rains. Some of her findings hold up. Several figures show real alignments with solstice and star-rise positions. The work was methodologically serious, and modern sky simulation software has confirmed specific correlations she identified with a protractor and a notebook. But the theory runs into a scale problem. She found astronomical alignments for some figures, not most. The long straight lines, the most numerous feature of the plateau, do not consistently point at anything significant in the sky. Anthony Aveni, an American archaeoastronomer, spent years analyzing line orientations and found the distribution essentially random relative to astronomical targets. More correlations than pure chance, but far fewer than Reiche's theory required. She was right about part of something larger. The astronomical dimension is probably real. It is simply not the whole answer. Reiche died in Lima in 1998. She was 95 years old. Peru declared her a national heroine. She is buried near the plateau. There is something genuinely moving about Maria Reiche. She gave 50 years of her life to the proposition that an ancient people had organized the sky into the ground. She died not knowing the full answer. She died knowing more than anyone before her, and less than the question required. Scientists who dedicate their lives to a single problem and do not fully solve it are not failures. They are the people who draw the map that the next generation uses to find the door. The person who found the door was not an astronomer. He was an anthropologist, and he was not looking at the sky. Johann Reinhard is an American anthropologist best known for discovering the Inca ice mummy called Juanita, a young woman sacrificed on a Peruvian volcano in the late 1500s and preserved almost perfectly for 5 centuries. Before Juanita, Reinhard spent years studying Andean religious practice. In the 1980s, he published a paper that changed the Nazca debate permanently. His argument was straightforward. The Andean religious system, from the earliest pre-Columbian cultures through to the Inca, centered on the worship of mountains, called apus, as the source of water. Mountains were not symbols of water. They were the gods who held water and released it in proportions to the quality of human worship. Reinhard mapped the lines not against the sky, but against the landscape. He looked at where the lines pointed. He looked at where the figures were located relative to water sources and mountain sightlines. And what he found was not random. The lines showed a consistent tendency to point toward mountains on the horizon and toward seasonal water sources below. The trapezoid shapes, the so-called landing strips, he re-identified as ceremonial gathering spaces. In Andean ritual practice, large flat areas are used for communal religious gatherings. The people did not look at the trapezoids from above. They walked into them. They gathered inside them. They performed ritual acts within them, facing the mountains, asking for rain. The straight lines were ritual pathways. Walking a line toward a sacred mountain is itself a form of prayer. The lines were not drawn for someone to see. They were drawn for someone to walk. Now look at the figures through this framework. The spider. In Andean cosmology, the spider is associated with water and rain prediction. Many species emerge and become active in the hours before rainfall. The Nazca spider figure is 46 meters long and includes a detail only discovered under modern analysis. One extended leg corresponds anatomically to the reproductive organ of a specific Amazonian spider genus called Rhicinuli, an animal found only in the rainforest, the source of Amazonian water. The Nazca brought a creature from the wet place into the dry place and made it large enough to be a landmark. That is not decoration. That is theology. The hummingbird. Its arrival in the Andes corresponds with the beginning of the flowering season, which follows the rains. The monkey, a rainforest creature. Its presence in the desert says, we know where the water comes from. The condor, a messenger between the human world and the mountain gods, 270 meters long. Not a portrait, an address. There is also the subsurface dimension. A 2014 ground-penetrating radar study found that several long straight lines trace the paths of underground water channels. They follow aquifers. They mark the invisible arteries of a water system the Nazca understood intimately through the construction of their puquios. The lines were not marking something in the sky. They were marking something in the ground. One more thing that never receives the attention it deserves. The most recent geochronological work suggests geoglyph construction intensified in the later phases of Nazca culture, precisely when deforestation and climate stress were undermining the water table. The Nazca response to a water crisis was not to abandon the lines. They drew more of them. A civilization under existential pressure doubled down on its ritual relationship with water. The prayers did not work. The water did not come back. The huarango trees were gone. The Nazca fell. the lines are still there. In September 2024, researchers from Yamagata University in Japan published results that made headlines around the world. Using AI image analysis software, combined with high-resolution drone photography, they identified 303 previously unrecorded geoglyphs on the Nazca Plateau. 303. As of 2023, the total known figure count stood at around 400. The new survey increased that total by more than 70% in a single research cycle. Let that number sit. 90 years of archaeology, aerial surveys, satellite images, Maria Rika with her protractors. Every documentary crew that has ever flown a camera over the Pampa Colorada, and a machine with a camera and an algorithm found 303 things that all of that missed. The Yamagata team had been working at Nazca since 2004. The 2024 cohort was found by training AI on known geoglyphs, their size, shape, contrast ratio, edge profiles, and then applying it to areas previously classified as blank desert. The algorithm found patterns the human eye had not classified as meaningful. Most new figures are small, 5 to 20 meters across. Many are humanoid, small figures with recognizable arms, legs, and heads. Several are in areas photographed and surveyed multiple times and simply passed over as featureless terrain. Not everyone is celebrating without reservation. Some archaeologists have raised legitimate questions about false positive rates. Pattern recognition software trained on geoglyphs may also flag natural rock formations. The Yamagata team acknowledges this and states the 303 figure reflects the count after manual human verification of every positive flag. But here is what the new figures change. They change the scale of the practice. The Nazca Plateau was not a gallery where one community constructed a defined monument and stopped. It was a palimpsest, an accumulation. Some new figures overlap older ones. Some older figures show evidence of modification. Extended, altered, revised. The plateau was not completed. It was continuously under construction. This is a book being written and rewritten across 1,000 years by a community that knew every previous entry and chose to add their own chapter. The new figures also changed the distribution analysis. Reinhardt's water theory had been tested against the known corpus. Now that corpus is 70% larger. Preliminary analysis suggests the new figures follow the same distributional patterns as the known ones, clustering near water-related landmarks, following line orientations consistent with the established network. The new data does not contradict the water theory. It amplifies it. And here is the detail not yet widely reported in English language coverage. Among the new figures, several are located directly above mapped underground water channels, not adjacent to them. Directly above them. The case is not closed. The case just reopened. Here is the full picture. The Nazca lines are the material record of a civilization's relationship with water in one of the most arid environments human beings have ever chosen to inhabit. They are astronomical in places, because the Andean water cycle is connected to celestial movement, and the Nazca were sophisticated enough to know it. They are zoological, because the animals they depicted were the living signals of water. They are geometric, because ritual walking towards sacred mountains required clear paths. They are underground maps, because the people who built them also built the Puquios and understood the invisible geography of water beneath their feet. They are not one thing, they are a system. 1,000-year conversation between a community and a landscape that could kill them at any moment. Here is what nobody ever says directly about the alien theory. It is not just wrong, it is inadequate. Even if it were true, even if tomorrow someone produced incontrovertible evidence that an extraterrestrial intelligence visited the Pampa Colorada and drew a monkey in the sand, that would be less interesting than what actually happened. What actually happened is this. Human beings, with sticks and string, in one of the harshest environments on the planet, built a ritual infrastructure of extraordinary complexity and maintained it for 1,000 years. They mapped their underground water system from the ground and the air simultaneously. They drew the animals of the rainforest and the desert to say, that is where the water comes from. They walked straight lines toward mountains they believed were gods and asked for rain. And then they cut down the trees that held their water table together, and they were gone. That story is not diminished by its human scale. It is defined by it. Maria Reich spent 50 years on that plateau because she believed the lines were asking something of the universe. Johann Reinhardt spent decades in the Andes because he believed the lines were speaking to the mountains. The Yamagata team built an algorithm and found 303 things nobody had seen, because the evidence keeps arriving and the question refuses to close. Of the 303 new figures identified in 2024, fewer than 40 have been dated with any precision. We do not yet know if all of them were made by the Nazca or by communities that moved through the region before or after the Nazca peak. We do not know what the small humanoid figures represent. We do not know if the AI missed more than it found. The Nazca drew prayers in the desert for 1,000 years. The prayers did not save them. The deforestation continued. The water table fell. The civilization collapsed around 500 CE, and within a generation, the plateau was empty. The lines outlasted the people who made them by 15 centuries. They are still there. We just arrived in the window when the desert is still holding them. And now we have machines with cameras that are finding the parts of the message that human eyes missed for 1,000 years. Whatever the lines were asking, whatever prayer they encoded between a dry plateau and the water it desperately needed, the asking is still there in the stone. We finally have the tools to hear all of it. The question I want to leave you with is not who built the lines. We know who built them. The question is whether we are any different from the people who did. We know that deforestation destabilizes water systems. The Nazca learned this empirically, expensively, after it was too late to reverse. We are writing our own lines in the atmosphere and the data, hoping that something watching will notice and respond. The Nazca are not a cautionary tale about ancient ignorance. They are a cautionary tale about what happens when a civilization is so focused on asking for what it needs that it stops noticing it is destroying the system that provides it. What do you think the lines were really for? Astronomy, ritual, water maps, all three, or something we have not figured out yet? Drop it in the comments. And if you want a second episode on the Pukios, the underground aqueducts that still work today, let us know. Click the next video on your screen.